leaders and all of us as humans really are learning to be more relational.
Mhm.
There's sort of this idea, well, and I think it's partly sort of our upbringing, especially in cultures where there's an individualistic sense of self. You know, in cultures where there's a collectivist sense of self, it's a little easier to recognize that relational connection and that interconnection. And so I think taking some of the burden off of leaders to have to always be answers.
Mhm.
They maybe like to know the answers and sort of be a know-it-all, but that actually isn't particularly useful. Once in a while it is, and in certain situations you need to have somebody that just knows. But mostly, this sort of the collective emergence of wisdom and sort of recognizing that the way to solve things, especially when there's multiple people involved, is to draw on everybody's wisdom and to really, I mean, especially if they're going to be the ones executing on some task, well, they have to have full buy-in. That's where the coaching mindset instead of the supervisory mindset comes in, is when somebody comes up with their own solution, they're that much more likely to act on it because it's theirs. The ownership is sort of embedded in the fact that they came up with it. Whereas if they're told to do something, they're less likely to follow through because it's not theirs. And it might be based on a skill set they don't have. Whereas if they come up with it, they're going to come up with something that they can actually execute on and that's feasible. And so I think that just generally this relational piece, and I think this applies systemically um, across the board for COVID, post COVID, or at tail end of COVID, depending on where we are. And so this capacity to leverage groups and systems of people, I think, is a real relational skill, and is why we're seeing the trends in leadership that we're seeing, away from being a boss and a manager to being a thought partner. And I think, you know, the work that folks like you do and the Mindful Life, Mindful Work do, I think that's, you know, we're maybe not the tip of the spear, but we're near the tip of the spear. It definitely is the first few decades of the tip of the spear, and I think that's going to continue. You know, I saw a post, just the headline of a post on LinkedIn this morning, saying something like "kindness is the new leadership." Well, what is the core of kindness? The core of kindness is relational,
Uh-huh.
recognizing when you're hurting somebody's feelings, or doing something unskillfully. And it's not about being overly touchy feely, of course, but it's about being awake relationally. And I think a lot of leaders have had the luxury of being asleep. And that's been a service to those that they've led, but it's also a disservice to themselves, of course, because they suffer in isolation and they feel more stress. Why not spread that out and actually be effective?